Hey, History Seeking here, and today we visit Conisbrough Castle near Doncaster, dating back to the 10th century and steeped in history with a royal visit from King John in 1201. The castle was the inspiration of Sir Walter Scott in 1819 with his famous novel Ivanhoe. Despite its royal status, the castle was abandoned in the late 15th century. Let's take a look in the museum. The de Warennes were one of the richest and best connected families in medieval England. They were related by marriage to the French and Scottish kings and played important military and political roles in the English kingdom. Let's take a look at some of the artefacts in the glass case before us. In the top left we have stone and ceramic roof tiles used at the castle. In the front left are a selection of nails, forged by the blacksmith. As you can imagine, thousands of these were made and used. And in the back right is a round stone. It was from the original fireplace. In front of that, which looks like a coiled up wire, is called tingles, used to hold replacement slate, tiles and glass in place. This is made from lead, which is very flexible, waterproof and doesn't erode as quick as other materials. And at the very front of the glass on the right is a 15th century chisel. Jugs were common vessels at Hamlin and Isabel's Conisbrough. They were plain and functional, used to serve the table for preparation in the kitchen or anywhere where liquids were scooped, stored or poured. Jars and bowls were used for cooking and for storing and transporting foodstuffs. All those that were used at Conisbrough were from North Lincolnshire. They had a distinctive crushed shell additive, which prevent cracking when the pot comes off the warm fire onto a cold table. The dripping pan was used for the fat from the boar and for candle making. Saucepans, known as pipkins, with a single handle and 3 short legs for stability, could be placed straight onto the fire to warm soups and some sauces. As the hub of a wider estate, the castle had an important role as an administrative centre. It served as a bank and archive and a source of employment and revenue to the local population. Below we can see a selection of coins. As a grand stone building, the castle was rivalled only by the church. It stood at the junction of major trading routes and overlooked the crossing of the River Don, dominating and controlling the landscapes. To the people of the town it must have seemed overwhelming. To rival barons and the king, it broadcast a message of sophistication as well as power. Despite its military appearance, Conisbrough was not designed purely for defence. It was the fashion for a great lord to live in, such as a building, and only the elite were allowed royal permission to fortify their residence. So in the case before us, we've got 2 jugs from the 14th and 15th century, made in Rawmarsh in Rotherham on the bottom. The dripping pan, which was medieval pottery, it certainly wasn't watertight, meaning whatever was placed in it would seep into the fabric of the clothing and would be difficult to remove fat from the cooking meat. And after a while that's going to smell. On the shelf are some 15th and 16th century cups, for the most of the Middle Ages, Pottery vessels would have not been used at the dining table of the wealthy. More decorative vessels, made from glass and pewter, wood and horn, would have been used instead. We are now standing inside the Barbican, and in front of us would have been the gatehouse. The Barbican protected the gatehouse, the entrance to the castle, and the weakest point in the castle walls. It was manned by porters and closed at dusk. Originally, the gatehouse probably had light fortifications, which were strengthened and remodelled in the 14th century. Large decorative chimneys were also added at the same time. Barbicans took many different designs, with straight or curved passages, and a varying number of towers. Conisborough's design had 2 parallel curved walls, and a drawbridge spanning a deep gap. The bridge could be raised in case of danger, but if enemies managed to enter the Barbican, they had to climb a steep and narrow path, while being attacked from the walkway on top of the walls. Similar Barbicans were built at the Tower of London, Newcastle, and nearby at the de Warenne's Castle in Sandal. The heart of the castle was the Inner Bailey. It contained all the important buildings and was protected by curtain walls. The existing rubble stone walls were built at the beginning of the 13th century, replacing earth and timber defences. The walls were constructed quickly. Their stonework is rough and foundations are shallow. This may have caused the collapse of a large stretch of the walls, approximately 55 metres, which pulled down the eastern gatehouse tower. We can see the remains of the wall lying against the slope below us. The collapse probably damaged the neighbouring buildings, one of which may have housed a chapel. The chapel here used by all the castle residents, while the Lord and Lady attended private services in the keep. To the left below the fence, this area is actually believed to be a prison. We are now in the Inner Bailey, looking at the remains of the residential apartments. Built against the curtain walls, they were extended in the 15th century, when the keep was first built. That was where the Lord and Lady stayed when they came to the castle. But with a growing desire for comfort, in the later Middle Ages, important residents of the castle moved into these apartments. Countess Maud Clifford, who lived here between 1415 and 1446, enjoyed all the luxuries of the time, spacious chambers heated with fireplaces and ensuite toilets. Maud's private chamber was probably located in the corner, beside the Great Hall. Here she would have managed her estate, listened to music, received visitors, or just relax in the window seat, enjoying the view of the countryside. But the level of comfort varied across the castle. The finest chambers on the first floor were occupied by Maud, her favourite lady-in-waiting, her family or important guests, while the household and estate servants lived in the simple rooms below. At the bottom of the wall we can see a drain. The hall was the greatest room in the castle and the centre of its public life. It was an impressive, richly decorated space, displaying the Earl's wealth and status. Although everyone could enter the hall, it was arranged to reflect the household's hierarchy. The Lord and Lady, together with important guests and high servants, sat above everyone else on the platform, at the west end of the hall. The hall hosted feasts, music and dancing, but was also the place where local power was exercised. Here, the Earl or his officers collected rent, administered justice, and granted audiences. The remains of this building probably date to the 13th century, with a number of later adaptations. However, Hamlin and Isabel's castle certainly had a large hall for the same purpose. In medieval castles, the kitchen was the heart of the service range. A great number of people helped prepare food for the lord, his family and their servants. Conisborough's kitchen was a square timber frame building, with a pyramidal roof and a single central hearth. It was originally detached, but later connected to the rooms called the larder, pantry and buttery, which were reached from the great hall. The lord never entered the kitchen. It was managed by his steward, who also controlled other departments, such as the slaughterhouse and the woodhouse. The steward supervised the clerk of the kitchen, the cook and the surveyor of the dresser. They bought provisions, decided what to cook, checked the food as it was left, the kitchen, and recorded what was eaten and drunk. This was the drainage system for the kitchen. Up the stairs into the castle wall was the latrine. The tower or keep was built by Hamlin, Earl of Warenne, in the 1170s. It was the strongest building in the castle and housed the lord's most private room, where he invited the privileged few into his great chamber. He met with important guests and officials to discuss business. The top floor was a bedchamber with a private chapel. On the roof was a bread oven and water cisterns, which supplied the internal wash basins. Drinking water was drawn from the secure well in the basement. It is possible that valuables and money were kept in the basement, the most secure space in the castle. The ruined stairs before us probably went up onto the wall walk around the castle. original Conisbrough Castle was built by William de Warenne, the first Earl of Surrey, who was the son-in-law of William I, or William the Conqueror as is better known. Upon the third Earl's death in 1147, the castle passed to his daughter, Isabel de Warenne, as William had no male heirs, while the castle that still stands today was designed and built by Isabel's husband, Hamlin Plangent, who was the illegitimate half-brother of Henry II. Hamlin and Isabel visited Conisbrough regularly, probably annually, a pattern which may have been established by previous generations of the family. In 1201, Hamlin's nephew, later King John, stayed at Conisbrough and throughout that century in the next castle, remained one of the principal seats of the Warennes. The Great Hall or public area is where the Lord would meet visitors. It had a toilet, basin, a window seat and a spectacular large hooded fireplace, unique in its day. In 1317, the Yorkshire lands owned by the de Warenne family were captured by Thomas, Earl of Lancaster, during a rebellion which he led. The rebellion was subsequently squashed following the Battle of Boroughbridge in 1322. Thomas was captured, charged with treason and found guilty. He was executed outside the walls of Pontefract Castle. Conisbrough Castle was then taken over by Edward II, who ordered repair work to be carried out on both Pontefract and Conisbrough. The castle eventually came back into the hands of the de Warenne family in 1326, when John de Warenne became custodian. The Duke died in 1415 at the Battle of Agincourt, and the castle passed to his son Richard, who was in turn died by execution in 1415, with his wife Maud taking over the castle until her death in 1446. Richard, Duke of York, Maud's stepson, took over the castle following Maud's death, but Richard died in 1460 at the Battle of Wakefield. Richard's son then inherited Conisbrough, and following his coronation as Edward IV in 1495, Conisbrough became a permanent royal castle. By the time of Henry VIII's reign, Conisbrough had fallen into disrepair, with much of the damage that can be seen today seeming to have occurred by the early 1500s. Henry commissioned a survey of the castle in 1537 to determine what state it was in, with surveyors reporting back that the castle was in a dilapidated state, nearer ruin than a castle. This would have been the Lord's Room, with its beautiful window seat and private chapel. When Elizabeth I came to the throne following Henry's death, she gave the castle to Henry Carey, 1st Baron of Hudson. Conisbrough then passed to the Coke family, before being acquired by the Duke of Leeds in 1737. By the time of the English Civil War, such was the damage to the castle that no further destruction was suffered, as most of the defences had already been torn down, while the keep remained intact as it had previously done and still today. In 1859, Sackville Lane Fox, the 12th Baron of Connors, bought the castle while it stayed in the Fox family until it was sold in 1949 to English Heritage. In the Middle Ages, the rooftop level of the keep looked very different to what you can see now. The crenelled walls were higher and protected the guards on duty. The turrets had viewing platforms and small rooms which provided shelter, but also contained a bread oven and rainwater cisterns to supply the keep's basins. The rooftop also offered views of the Lord's domain. Medieval castles dominated and changed the landscape. Lords created deer parks, built mills, ran farms, and took stone from quarries. If you stood here in the 12th century, you would have seen the Conisbrough Mill, down by Curly Brook, and a deer park further away to the south. The mill provided flour for the castle and earned money by charging the tenants for grinding their grain. The deer park was a wildlife farm, providing food for the Lord's table. It was a breeding ground for fallow deer, and it had rabbit warrens and fish ponds. Some place names, for example, is Conisbrough Parks. Park Lane and Conisbrough Park Farm still indicate the existence of the deer park. The view southwest shows how close the castle and town are to each other. Conisbrough is an ancient settlement. It was here long before the castle, but it is possible that in the Middle Ages the two formed a large fortified settlement with a series of defences. When the keep was built, it became the tallest feature in the landscape, rivalled only by the church. These two buildings, visible from far and wide, spoke of those who ruled the medieval society, the barons and the clergy. Over time, the castle was abandoned, and its administrative and judicial roles moved to the village. While Conisbrough developed into a small town, with the arrival of coal mining and glassworking, the castle became first a ruin, then a leisure amenity and an inspiration for writers and artists. Today it still commands pride of place in the landscape, but as a monument which tells stories of the past, rather than a status symbol and instrumental of control. Thank you all for watching, do take care and have a fantastic week ahead.